All right. Well, you know what was really cool about that? This is, by the way, this is going to be the fourth and final Doors album that we cover. It is their sixth studio album. We covered their first three during season 1 of the Combing the Stacks podcast. Let's do a little trivia, guys, on the spot. Album number 1, what was the name?
The Doors.
No.
Yes, you got it.
Oh, wait,
No,
I thought you meant the one that we covered. Album number 1 was the debut album of the Doors. The first one we covered was Waiting for the Sun.
Okay, yeah, we're doing them in order of how they were released. So yes, The Doors was the third we covered, but it is their first album. Okay. What was their second album, if you guys remember?
Oh gosh, we covered it on the
Strange
bonus
Days.
episode, right?
Yes, Matt nailed it. Strange Days. Do you guys remember the cover of Strange Days?
Yeah, it was like a carnival. It's one of Josh's favorite musical genres, the carnival
Yes,
genre.
I was going to say Josh's favorite psychedelic carnival was the front. And it was basically what Jim Morrison said he thought the world looked like when he went out, was Strange Days. You mentioned number 3, which was?
That was Waiting for the Sun.
Correct. Matt is killing it today. Waiting for the Sun. And then we did not cover albums 4 and 5. 4 was the not so well received The Soft Parade from mid-1969. And then we actually didn't cover, and this one was actually much better regarded, Morrison Hotel from 1970. And that is
Morrison Hotel was actually rated higher than Waiting for the Sun on Best Ever Albums, but because it's in the 70s and the 70s was a better decade, we're not covering it. So,
and Morrison Hotel is going to be an important one to know in the context of this because it's sometimes seen as a sister piece for LA Woman because it was sort of where they felt they first delved into a more blues approach, and then LA Woman was sort of the outgrowth of that. So that's where we're at. One thing I also want to shout out is in doing my research this week, sometimes we get very lucky in terms of timing, and Ultimate Classic Rock Magazine, a place that I go to for a lot of times because they have a lot of found footage and articles from the time period and, modern retrospectives. They actually did a song-by-song breakdown of LA Woman 2 days ago. April 19th, 2021. Wow. It's called The Doors, LA Woman, the story behind each track. So while I use them for research anyway, you couldn't find a more hot off the presses article. So I'll give them a little bit of a shout out. The writer's name is Rob Smith. And it's a pretty comprehensive article. And I definitely pulled some stuff off of this.
What was it on again?
Ultimate Classic Rock. It's actually a magazine, but they have a website as well that will release.
Yeah, there's
videos.
no more magazines. It's all online.
Yeah, but they still release the magazines in the European market. It's like I remember when Josh worked at Barnes and Noble, right? And he was nice enough to bring me the magazines, and I would just pour through them and get these random CDs that.
The covers were always ripped off, weren't they, Josh? Didn't you have to give us? Yeah, there was like some sort of.
Yeah, that's how you get them for free.
There you go.
That's all I have to do.
When they get rid of them.
So if I rip off a cover of a magazine in Barnes & Noble, I can just walk out with it? That's okay?
Yeah.
All right, it's good to know.
Well, needless to say, I read many things that when people say, how did you find out that random stuff or know that? A lot of them were from reading those magazines that Josh got me over the years. And there were CDs that were equal parts great and terrible, depending on what it was. I remember in particular there would be a lot of like artists cover somebody. And sometimes they'd be great and sometimes they'd be horrendous and everything in between. So shout out to them.
John, you want some numbers on LA Woman before you
I'd love some freaking numbers.
I knew you would. So we got LA Woman coming in at number 47 in the 1970s. It was ranked number 9 in 1971, 192 of all time. This is all from Best Ever Albums, and it did not make the Rolling Stone Top 500 list.
Okay. Well, so I guess I'm not going to do a super long bio because the Doors' career from their first album to this album feels like it was like on a racetrack, just a drag race right forward, right? And this represents the final, maybe 10 yards of the drag race because unfortunately, 3 months after, not even 3 months, close to 3 months after this album was released, Jim Morrison would be found dead in Paris. In 1971, July 3rd, of a heart attack at the age of 27. And, in previous episodes, we kind of outlined the beginning of the Doors, how it happened, and we often made note of the fact of, Morrison's behavior was escalating as we went on, but we hadn't really gotten into the period where he turned into the Morrison who was full blown alcoholic, put on the weight and stuff like that. When we get to L.A. Woman, he is, pretty deep in the throes of that Morrison. He is living in California, and he is on the precipice of moving to Paris with his girlfriend, and who, of course, they had a incredibly tumultuous relationship, to say the least. It is an artist relationship. As a reminder of what was going on during this time, the Jim Morrison concert in 1969 was charged with indecent exposure and profanity were the two charges. The Doors and Morrison always maintained that they did not think that he exposed himself and felt that he was convicted. Basically before anybody knew what it was because of the band's reputation.
So he didn't pull a Lenny Kravitz.
Well, we don't know because some people say he did and others say he didn't, right? So it's kind of one of these, Doors lore. But the band has always said that they did not believe that he did. Needless to say, he is convicted of those two offenses, but really the aftermath of that did not land him in jail, and it was kind of more of a probationary type deal that the thing was, but the legal troubles really haunted him in this period of time and were kind of always in the front of what the band was doing. So that is there. A second thing that is going on during this time, as I just mentioned, is that Jim Morrison's behavior got even more erratic. He pretty much became a full-fledged alcoholic. He was away from the band for long periods of time. In fact, at the time that he passed away, the rest of the Doors were in California putting together music and then basically waiting for Morrison to come back and add, lyrics to the music and things along those lines. So there's a whole bunch of tracks that would become the Doors album after this, the one they released without Morrison, that were going to be the tracks that Morrison was going to work on. So that is there. Another thing that very much informs this album is that their longtime producer, Paul Rothchild, had actually left the project. There's a lot of different stories. Rothchild's story to this is that what I'm about to tell you is he was trying to do it to motivate the band, but the band said they thought he was, stone serious. And that is that they came into the studio and Rothschild was kind of like a taskmaster, and I think at one point Ray Manzarek said it was like when he left, it was like the warden was gone, kind of. Mm-hmm. And he heard the first two songs that the Doors made for this album, and it's important to know the Doors kind of went in with no material for this album. And if you remember when we talked about their earlier albums, their first and second album was basically their live set, right?
Right.
Remember we said the best song, yeah. And then the third, they went in with quite a bit of material because Morrison had notebooks and notebooks of lyrics, right? And then it was kind of just a matter of going in there and working out stuff. In this, they really didn't have much of anything. They plumbed a notebook of Morrison's from 1968, was where some of this came from lyrically. But the Doors play Rothschild Love Her Madly and Riders on the Storm, and he referred to it famously as cocktail lounge music, and then walked away from the project. He said with the idea of coming back. But before he did, he recommended that Bruce Botnick take over, and Bruce Botnick took over as the co-producer of this album. And at that point, the rest of the recording of this album is fascinating. Morrison is singing a lot of the lyrics into a microphone in the sort of the opening of a doorway near a bathroom is where it's going to go. To be specific, there's a lot of stuff in terms of like how they recorded this album that is very interesting. But a couple things that really I think most people immediately recognize about this album, and I'll be interested to hear your take on this. This is considered to be the Doors' blues album. It's a blues album. It's a fully realized blues album.
That's apparent.
This is a concept album to some extent. They didn't go in looking at this as a concept album, but they kind of all realized that this was a concept album about L.A. In fact, Ray Manzarek said it's about L.A., it's about the men, the women, the boys, the girls, love lost, lovers lost, and lovers found in L.A. was how he said he would describe this album. And in particular, Jim Morrison, it's looked at as both a love letter and a farewell note to L.A. from him before he moves to Paris. And the other thing that comes out of this is that this album is kind of considered to be the first Doors album that moved into what people think the sound would have shifted to if the Doors continued to play throughout the mid-'70s. And so it's also, with the exception of the first Doors album, it was pretty much the one that critics liked immediately. The other albums in between were kind of met with a mixed reception depending on who was listening, but this one critics sort of liked in the moment, even before Morrison passed away, right? They liked this pretty much out of the gate. So that is a little bit of the background. I've got a lot of other context, and I'll probably try to add it in here as we talk about it. But instead of going long on the bio, because we've done a lot of them, I'm interested to hear what your take is, because we've always kind of been uniform in our thoughts on the Doors up to this point. But I think I'll be interested to see where you guys come. So Matt, maybe let's have you start out. What are your thoughts on this album?
So I think this might be my favorite Doors album that we've covered.
Me too.
And add me as a third. So there we go. Mm-hmm.
So it's the blues is definitely there. My initial reaction was being disappointed that Roadhouse Blues is not on this record. I guess that's on Morrison Hotel.
Morrison Hotel. Yep.
Yeah. Because that's one of my favorite Doors songs, and I've always loved it. So I was a little disappointed, but so I only knew, kind of the hits, or the ones that were at least on the Greatest Hits album, which included Lover Madly, L.A. Woman, and Riders on the Storm. So most of this album was new to me, but I did find it, surprisingly good, or consistent, I guess you could say. I pretty much liked every song on the album, with the exception of L'America. That's the one that stood out as kind of the clunker for me. That's the one song I think that sounds a little bit more like older Doors stuff. They're kind of doing a creepier kind of a song. There was another song that was similar to that sound, I thought, on Waiting for the Sun. The name of it's escaping me at the moment, but I didn't really care for that one either, but I did like the blues aspect of this. I like Morrison's voice here, the kind of like the screaming blues Morrison voice, much more than the droning. You still have droning Morrison on here, but it's not. But that's not the prominent Morrison that I'm getting. But I've Been Down So Long was a great blues song. That's a great long. Been Down So Long. It seems there's some goddamn long, it seems like Up From Here. It's like, that's a cool line. I don't know, that I really like that line. There's a couple of the long songs on here, and I didn't realize this until this past week, but I'm pretty convinced after listening to this album that L.A. Woman is my clear favorite Doors song. That is
out of all of them.
Out of all of them, that's that I've always liked it, but the more I listen to it, I'm picking out parts. I really like the piano playing of Ray Manzarek, and I know I've talked about him before, but one of the things I like about his playing on this record is he takes out a lot of the effects, and it's more of a straight up piano playing that he's doing.
And that was last album. He moved over to the stand up piano more than the Hammond organ.
Yeah. And I like that. And I like the Hammond organ. I mean, that's a quintessential sound of the Doors. But as far as just overall an enjoyment of the record, the piano playing that he's doing on here, it's almost like a saloon piano, that you walk into an old Western saloon or something and the piano's going, it's kind of got an echoey, type sound. But he's got that going on with like something like L.A. Woman, Lover Madly, that, really cool. And he's got more of a keyboard sound on Riders of the Storm, but it's I don't know, it seems a little bit more, it seems less dated, I guess, than some of the other stuff that he was doing in the earlier parts of the 60s. But I like the first half better, I would say, for sure. I did like Hyacinth House. The more it went on, Crawling King Snake was good. The Wasp, I liked all of those the more I listened to them. And Riders of the Storm, it is more of a droney, older sounding Doors song in that regard, but I still think that's really good. It's like it got a jazzy kind of instrumental part that's going on with with some of the sounds that they got going on there, and I really liked it. The more I listen to it, the more I like it. The Changeling's a great opening song. Yeah, I really, other than L'America, which it was kind of annoying to me. I would end up skipping through that song as the week went on. Really thought this was a solid album, and it's too bad, obviously, for multiple reasons that Jim Morrison died, but one of them being that they couldn't have done more of this, in latter years. So solid thumbs up for me on this record.
Yes, I'm right in line with you. I was surprised right away how much better this album was than the previous Doors albums, and how much more I liked it. It's like they stripped away all of the things that I found annoying about or distracting about their sound from the previous albums. You know, the carnival sound, the overuse of the organ, they really reined that in, and like Matt said, switched to some different key instruments depending on the song. You still get the essence of the Doors here, but it's in like a blues form, which I really loved. I did not have a problem with La America like Matt seemed to do. I like the dark sounding start to it. It reminded me of Black Sabbath a little bit, and kind of the spookiness of it. You still get Morrison sounds different on this album too. Would you guys agree with that? He sounds a little rougher, or maybe reined in, or I don't know,
well, he was
tarnished or something.
Well, he was struggling with his booze,
yeah.
like the booze. He was struggling with his voice because of the booze. Pretty much everybody mentions that this is a different Morrison. Some people like it as like it fits with the blues sound, right? Wary, and you wonder if crystalline early, Sex God Jim Morrison would sound like doing these songs. But yes, that is a key feature of this album that I was going to bring up, that his voice sounds very different.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's good or bad, but it is noticeable almost right away. It would be interesting to hear a younger Jim Morrison do this album. But if it's the theme and mood of the album, his voice. So I didn't have a problem with it. I thought this album in general is also kind of more upbeat and a little bit more like Love Her Madly, more pop oriented or rock oriented. But you still have the blues backbone throughout all of it. I really like. You still get the funny lyrics, like in Crawling King Snake, where he's just talking about being a snake and eating other things and eating a woman and stuff like that, and then you cap it up with Riders on the Storm, which is probably one of their more famous songs, I would say.
Now, do you know that Crawling King Snake was a cover of a John Lee Hooker song?
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yep,
definitely. I thought "L.A. Woman" was a little long for my liking, although I do like the song.
But it's got the different. One of the things I like about that is the different parts of it, because I think that they're all really good. And when he kicks into the Mr. Mojo rising and builds up with that, it is a long song. It's almost 8 minutes, but it's one of those songs for me that it's got enough things changing, and I like all the different parts of it. That it's totally fine being 8 minutes long for me anyway. Yeah, I
think my favorite song probably is Love Her Madly on this album. It's just a great like rock song.
It's got a great guitar riff that yeah.
And he sounds great on that too. So yeah, it's sad that we didn't get more Doors albums like this. I like the direction that they seem to be going in. But you can never account for that tragedy. So big thumbs up for me. Definitely the highlight of the Doors catalog that we listened to on this journey. And John, what did you think about this?
Yeah, I really like this album. I think I mentioned in earlier episodes that I think the Doors are at their best when they're a blues band. Yeah. I think I mentioned that exactly, and I said later on I'll be curious to see when I revisit. I thought we were going to revisit Morrison Hotel and L.A. Woman, but I think I even at one point said, the Doors album I always think is the one I like is L.A. Woman. And I was curious if I went back and liked this. And I was probably a little higher on the Doors albums than you guys were, which always surprised me because I didn't think of myself as a big Doors fan. But the Doors to me were kind of like the girl with the curl, right? When they're good, they're real good, but when they're bad, they're real bad, kind of. And what I like about this, Josh made a very prophetic comment, and I would agree with it. The Doors stripped out on this album a lot of the things that I didn't like about them and leaned into the things I did like about them. Morrison's lyrics, which I make fun of quite a bit, were actually quite a bit more, in my opinion, witty and sophisticated in this album. They were poetic without sort of realming into the absurd. Even a song... even like the longer songs didn't sort of lend themselves to excess as much as I felt like they did on earlier albums. So I like that right off the bat. As much as I love throat tearing Jim Morrison going out, I don't think that would have worked very well on these songs. And I actually think while it was probably not the best for him in terms of his lifestyle and how he was at that time health-wise, it lent itself. And I don't think I mentioned before, but another thing is that Morrison gained just an astronomical amount of weight in a short period of time as well. So I would guess that probably affected his voice too, making it a little bit more huskier, and even his breath control and stuff like that. So that's one thing that stood out. Something that I didn't mention before, but that I really want to mention here is that I never really think of the Doors as being a band with great bass parts. From time to time they'd have it. But one thing that came out of this, which I think that was really noticeable, is they brought in 2 session players on this album. And one of them was actually Elvis Presley's bassist. And one of the things that I noticed before I did the research, I think I've told you, I always like to listen to albums before I do my research, so I'm not influenced by it. Then I do my research and I listen to it again. And I noticed the bass jumped out at me quite a bit as being better on this album. And then doing my research, I found Elvis Presley's bassist Jerry Sheff came in. And actually a lot of the band made mention of the fact of how good it was to have him on the album, because the Doors often played without a bassist in earlier albums. And Densmore from the group categorized Sheff as an in-the-pocket man and said that his presence allowed him to communicate rhythmically with Morrison, and he slowed Ray down when his right hand on the keyboards got too darn fast. And so they said that basically he kind of steadied everything and kind of gave them a more restrained feel. And the other thing that was big about it was that Morrison was like a huge Elvis Presley fan, so he was stoked about having Sheff on the recording, and also he loves blues, Morrison, Howlin' Wolf type blues, John Lee Hooker, who we talked about before. And so Morrison actually was noticeable, like during the recording of this, they said it was sort of the best version of him in the last couple of years of his life. He kind of came ready to go.
That's what happens when you bring a pro in.
Yeah,
well, and it makes sense too that that John Densmore would really appreciate that as the only real rhythm guy in the band. I mean, relying on a keyboard player to do rhythm, I'm sure he was trying to do that. But it's got to be a totally different ballgame to have a bass player in there.
You got it. And they actually brought in a rhythm guitarist at times too, Mark Benno, as well, a session player, and he played on some of the tracks. And so I thought that was really noticeable, because the thing that always is missing for me with the Doors is that rhythm section, because they don't really have a powerhouse drummer, and the bass is absent at times. And in place of those 2 instruments, it's often that organ, which I love at times, but also can make them excessive at times. I like fall in between. I don't love it as much as Matt, but I don't hate it as much as Josh. It's all song specific for me. So that was another thing that I mentioned on this. And I just really liked the craftsmanship of these songs. I actually think that the Doors sounded best as a band on this album, even more so than they did on the first album, in my opinion. I thought they were I never think of the Doors as a tight band, right? Really, but they were tighter on this album because they kind of had to be, because they were playing streamlined blues. So it's funny to think of a blues band being tight, right? But like, this is a version of the Doors that's tighter than the other version. So all around, like this album, I really would have liked to have seen where they could have gone. But of course, the question is, were the Doors ever fated to be anything besides the Doors, right? With Morrison up front, because the same thing that kind of made them the Doors was the same thing that made them like an enigma, a fiery enigma. Like, it's kind of like, what would Morrison be like if he outlived the youth?
Yeah.
Hope I die before I get old. Like, can you even imagine what 35-year-old Jim Morrison would be like? It's almost hard to imagine that, as sad as that is, because so much of his legacy is baked into, the fact that he did die young, and the fact that during his life he was trying to outrun death,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned, John, that Crawling King Snake was a cover. How many other covers are on here, or is it mostly originals?
I believe that is the only
That's the only one, yeah.
Yes, it's the only one, yeah.
It fits nicely with the rest of the album.
Yeah, they recorded the 3 bluesiest songs on the last day. I think, I'm trying to remember what Jim Morrison called it, like Blues Day or something. I'm trying to remember exactly what he did, but the last day was devoted to doing the 3 songs that are the most bluesy. And Crawling King Snake was one of them. So, but yeah, I would say that even if you're not a huge Doors fan, this This would be where I'd direct you if you are aware of the Doors and you think of them as their earlier albums, and that's not your cup of tea. I think this is the one that could turn your opinion. I don't know how familiar you guys are with Morrison Hotel. I know it relatively well. Have you guys listened? I mean, I know Matt name dropped Roadhouse Blues was the first track on it, but
I probably just know anything that was on that was also on the Greatest Hits double album is the only thing that I really know.
Gotcha. And Josh, have you ever heard it before?
No, I haven't.
I went back and revisited it this time, and it is very much a predecessor to this. You can see they're going in this direction on that album. I would say it's my second favorite Doors album after this one. And once again, it's way more blues infused. And you can tell that they had a little bit of a chip on their shoulder for the reaction to their fourth album, and they wanted to kind of go back in and do it. Some people define this album as being inconsistent, which is unusual to me because I actually think this was the most consistent Doors album that we've listened to.
Yeah.
So,
like I said, I think for the most part, I would say that it took me longer to get into the second half of the record, particularly with Crawling King Snake and the Wasp. But like those took me a little bit longer to get into. Hyacinth House.
I like those too. Yeah.
I like them now, but I'm just saying that as opposed to the ones that I didn't know on the first side, like Bent Down So Long, Cars Hiss By My Window, and The Changeling, I liked almost immediately. And it just took me a few listens to get more into the other two. So, but I like I said, the only thing that really stood out to me was L'America. John, were you okay with the long songs on it, with the Riders on the Storm and L.A. Woman? How are you commenting on those?
I really like L.A. Woman. I've always liked that song. Like I said, I think it's because there's enough going on in there that I'm with it. Riders of the Storm... Let me put it in this context. I always feel like you're going to get a song on that on every Doors album, and as that type of song on every Doors album go, it's the least offensive to me of the ones we've done.
Okay.
It still's not my favorite, but you're not going to get a Doors album that doesn't end with, that type of song.
That does seem like their thing. Josh, did you like Riders on the Storm, or was that like a... Yeah.
Yeah, I like that more than LA Woman for some reason.
Oh wow, yeah.
Maybe
the more I listen, yeah. I loved L.A. Woman. John, who's Mr. Mojo, by the way? Like I always loved that part. I'm like, what is
that? Is Jim Morrison's name mixed up?
Like an
like if you took Jim Morrison and rearranged the letters,
and that's all Mr. Mojo, right? Oh. Okay.
So if you look at the lyrics of the song, it makes a lot of sense that Mr. Mojo is Jim. Yeah. That Mr. Mojo is Jim Morrison.
Actually, the first time I ever
sang autobiographically.
First time I ever heard "L.A. Woman" was Weird Al Yankovic had like a medley song, and he did "L.A. Woman" and he had Mr. Mojo Rising on there. So, yeah.
Well, you do, and we didn't even talk about this, but you can definitely see like that this album, Jim Morrison's writing lyrics about LA all over the place, and there's autobiographical lyrics, and that Mr. Mojo, like if you go back and listen to that song and you read it as like an autobiographical song, it totally makes sense. It was I think that like Mark Beno, the guest guitarist, right, and this is from the Classic Rock article, he mentioned that like Morrison showed him the lyrics, which he like wrote in this leather-bound notebook. I like leather-bound books. So he said it was like this yeah, exactly. And he said this leather-bound notebook was like this, gigantic phone book level thing. It's got poems, lyrics, and drawings and stuff. And he showed him the lyrics that became L.A. Woman. And the Krieger said that while he never asked Jim Morrison what his lyrics meant, because he never would have given him a straight answer, he's pretty confidently that L.A. Woman was actually, half of it was him singing about L.A., and half of it that the woman that Jim Morrison was talking about was actually L.A. as a city.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So, and he goes into a lot of detail of why he thinks that way, some of the imagery and stuff like that. But yes, Matt, the Mr. Mojo is Jim Morrison mixed up into a different arrangement. Yep.
And Josh, is that picture behind you? Is that he's got Jim Morrison's mugshot? Is that after his indecent exposure?
I don't know.
Arrest.
It could be the New Haven. Could be the New Haven.
September 20th. It says September 20th, 1970. So
that would be That was
another arrest.
Different one, I think. Yeah. He was having his challenges across the board. I believe though that was another arrest. I'll clean that stack next week just in case.
It's a pretty good mugshot, I gotta say. He looks pretty good.
I mean, the dude was photogenic, man. Yeah. There's a reason the dude was what he was, you know?
He doesn't look very happy, though, Josh. Not a happy.
I'm not saying he should be happy. I'm just saying he looks
good. Does he look smoldering? I know that's the word that most people say, yeah.
Yes. I would think so.
Mm-hmm.
He just has dark hair, too. Dark brown hair.
Another thing I'll end with is that my favorite story about the trial of Jim Morrison, he went to his sentencing on October 30th, 1970 in a wool jacket adorned with Indian designs was what he showed up in, which is like peak Jim Morrison. And for those that are wondering, he was sentenced to 6 months in prison and had to pay a $500 fine. He remained free on $50,000 bond.
$500 fine.
He was appealing that conviction at the time of his death. And to show you how things have changed from back then, he was allowed to go live in Paris.
Wow.
While he was convicted of that. So yeah,
I've been to Jim Morrison's grave. He's outside of Paris, and that's one of those grave sites where it's like a tourist destination now, and everybody graffitis it and spray paints all this like graffiti and flowers and stuff all over the place. It's pretty crazy.
Well, I know that one of the interesting things is he died exactly 2 years after Brian Jones from the Rolling Stones to the day afterwards. And I want to say he's buried in a part of Paris that's like considered to be a area where a lot of artists and writers, and I know Matt's going to laugh at this, but Balzac yes, was there. And
I got a picture
that.
next to that. Yeah. No, I was like, hey, get a picture next to Balzac.
Yeah.
I'll read to Balzac.
Well, he's also an incredible writer. The English guy in me feels like I can overlook the sexual innuendo and go into the, it would have warmed Jim Morrison's heart to be buried, near Balzac, and it warms Matt's heart to be able to say Balzac in an article about Balzac. Jim Morrison. Yeah, so.
With a name like Balzac, you got to be a good writer.
Yeah, exactly. even people back in the day were like, he said Balzac.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there you go. There's
Except
your
in a French accent. Ha ha.
Balzac.
We are most listened to the 18 to 22-year-old demographic, and now you know why. So yeah, go listen to this album. It was very good. I would recommend it, and I think it could turn your opinion on the Doors if you're not a big fan. So
it was I forgot to mention this. It's the second highest rated Doors album on Best Ever Albums. The debut album is still the highest one. Yep.